Hey, welcome to the Land in the Bible podcast. Today we are in episode 2 of Prophets, and this is a series that we started a few weeks ago and we took a little break. But if you're watching this as the Prophet series, you're not going to take a break because you just watched episode 1 and now you get episode 2.
Yeah, for sure. And what we want to do with this is, and this goes for a lot of the things that we have done or are doing. This would apply certainly to our Footsteps of Paul series. And I think to this is what I hope we can do is show how anything that the church or the community of believers is going through now is not new. That we have encountered secular, godless cultures that were opposed to faith and thought faith was stupid. We've done that over and over again throughout our history. Whether it was Paul entering, Greece that was dominated by Stoic and Epicurean philosophers and Greek paganism, or now whether it's looking at Elijah, who steps on the stage in a world dominated by the worship of Baal, Ashura, and Moloch, the Canaanite sort of divinities. It's the same thing. It's an oppositional culture that is leading people astray, that's causing real damage, real harm to people, that doesn't want to hear the message of faith. It's like they would really prefer if Elijah would just shut up and go away, but he can't shut up and go away. God's not going to let him do that, and his conscience won't let him do that. And we'll get there eventually. Elijah at one point says, I'm the only one who's really following you, Lord. So there's a real sense that he's got of a decline in faith, a decline in religiosity, a decline in people that really want to follow the Lord, which we can feel that way sometimes. And God says to him, I've still got 7,000 people. It's like, no, you missed it a bit on that. God still has a plan. He still works through those kind of times. And so I think it's worthwhile to look at, what did this guy, and really it's guys. So we're looking at the lives of Elijah and Elisha. So these two prophets. So and we got into this in the episode 1. Episode 1 was a conversation. And so just to be sure, it was awesome. I super, super enjoyed it. But just to sort of be sure we hit the points and that people sort of understood. I really want you to understand the world that Elijah stepped on to the stage of, and it was a time when anyone alive who was a believer would have just felt like the world was just off the rails. It was just, everything was falling apart. It was nothing but descent and falling away for 40, 60 years. The kingdom of Israel, the whole of Israel, had reached its peak under David and Solomon, its spiritual peak under David. Under Solomon, it had reached its, financial and political peak. But Solomon, especially near the end of his career, if you want to say his life, had just gotten distracted by worldly stuff,
other gods.
Wives. He racks up 700 wives or whatever, or 300, whatever it is. Between wives and concubines, it's like 1,000 women.
Yeah.
And it's, the Bible says that he loved them. I don't think that he loved them the way a man's supposed to love his wife. I think he loved them the way you love, I don't know what,
chocolate, football,
something, whatever your favorite collection is,
Yeah.
But he's influenced by them, and to make them happy, he builds all these temples to false gods, to Ashura and Baal and Moloch, and he introduces that, into the life of the nation. God really doesn't approve. And so, the kingdom is broken after him. His son comes on the stage, Rehoboam, and Rehoboam's an absolute idiot. As great as David and Solomon were, somehow, the third generation just fell off. And you have this incident where, Solomon's advisors, so the wisest man that ever lived, these people advised him. So they're probably pretty good, pretty astute. And they come to Rehoboam and say, hey, if you'll lower the taxes on people, they'll love you forever. And he says, okay, it's a good idea. Then he goes off with his drinking buddies that night, the other
Right.
20-year-olds, and they're all like, show him you're a man. And he's like, yeah, that's what I'll do. He comes back in the next day and says, I want to show him I'm a bigger man than my daddy ever was. And I want to raise the taxes. Well, then the whole northern, 9, 10 tribes are just like, we're out. And so the kingdom is broken. And so from that point on, when the Bible talks about Israel, it's not talking about the whole thing. It's talking about the northern tribes. And then Judah, and Benjamin sort of stayed to themselves in the south. So you have the north and the south now separated, divorced. The north is far wealthier because it's better farmland. It's better situated for trade. It has rich neighbors. It has bad neighbors, the Phoenicians and the Aramaeans. It's horribly sinful, demonically pagan, but rich and advanced. And so Israel is more wealthy and advanced than the southern kingdom. But Israel, the northern kingdom of Israel, immediately goes in a bad direction. Okay, the first king, Jeroboam, God sets him up and God speaks to him and says, I'll make you like David. I'll establish you forever. You'll just follow me. And he doesn't. He gets into a thing called the sin of Jeroboam, which is, it's still the worship of Yahweh. It's still worshiping God, but it's a compromised version of that. Okay. So what he does is he says, hey, I don't want the people to go to Jerusalem anymore because they'll take their tithes down there. And I don't want 10% of our nation's income to go to another country. So let's set up temples here. And we'll tell the people it's easier for you to go to Bethel or Dan. So basically the northern and southern extremities of the country, he put these temples so that people could just go there and cut their travel time in half or whatever, going to Jerusalem. And then your money stays local. And isn't that a good thing to let your money stay local and
Right.
Bless your families and help your community as opposed to going down there. And so he's like, yeah, just go to these temples and it'll be fine. But God had said, go to Jerusalem. And so that's a violation of the Lord's word. It's a compromise for the sake of convenience and for a financial gain. And then he says, we're still worshiping Yahweh, but let's make images. And they made these calves. Now, again, they're still worshiping Yahweh, but they've made images of a calf, which is a direct violation of the Ten Commandments. The Ten Commandments has two commands. One is to not worship false gods, but the other one is to not make graven images. In other words, God is like, you don't make an image of me. You can't make an image of me. There is no image of me. So don't try it. Don't do that. But to worship God, they make these calves as a focal point, as somehow a visual representation of who Yahweh is.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure they got in trouble for that.
Previously. Yeah, with Moses.
Moses came down and was like, what are you doing?
Yeah, and so you're supposed to know better than this, right?
Right.
But obviously this is just a strong urge in them is to, and you see this in other things, right? So like, God has said like, hey, you're not supposed to have kings. We're going to be a different kind of government. But they're like, but we want to be like the people around us.
Like,
We want a
fine.
king. He's like, yeah, okay, take one then. It's going to be bad for you.
Yeah.
And it seems like they just had a strong urge to be like those around them, which that's understandable. It's not fun to stand out. Sometimes when you stand out, you get made fun of and people don't like you and, you're not the cool kid at the party. And it just seems like there was a strong desire amongst the people of Israel before the exile. And once they go to Babylon and kind of get, I guess, spanked by God for the paganism, after that, it seems like that's gone. But pre-exile, there was just this strong desire, it seems like, to sort of compromise and blend in and fit in, which didn't serve them well, And so they wanted to do their religion in the way other people did them. So they made the calves. And then they came along and said, well, why is it that only Levites can be priests? Why can't everybody be a priest? And that sounds nice too. Doesn't that sound sort of more inclusive and more friendly? And, just because you're a tribe of, whatever, pick it, Dan or Naphtali, why can't you be a priest too? Yeah, it's true. I love God as much as you do. And so they allowed anybody to be, well, these are all violations of God's word. And this is called throughout the rest of the Old Testament, the sin of Jeroboam. So it's not going to idolatry, but it's worshiping God not the way he wanted to be worshiped. Okay. And every single king of Israel. So when you study it, it gets complicated because once the kingdoms diverge, you have kings of Judah and you have kings of Israel. And you have these two parallel timelines that are different. Kings of Judah are sometimes good, sometimes bad. You got good ones and bad ones. It's a mixed bag down there. Kings of Israel are just always bad. There's not a single good one the whole time. There are somewhat less evil ones occasionally, but they're all bad. Okay. And that's what you kind of have to know. And it's a descent. And so what you see is over the course of 40 years, you have this divergence. So this idea of united kingdom under God with the central place of worship in Jerusalem, and the Ark of the Covenant's there, and the priests are there, and you have this high point of the worship of God, and it's like that dream gets broken. And in the north in particular, you have this descent into sort of a false worship, and then that comes to a peak under Ahab. So Ahab becomes the king. The Bible says he did more evil than everybody else before him, and he made God angrier than everybody before him. So he's a bad, bad dude. And a lot of what he did that was really, really bad. So you got to think he goes beyond this like sin of Jeroboam, where we're worshiping God, but it's sort of a compromise in a sort of way, to where now let's just go full on paganism. And what he does, he marries this girl Jezebel. And nobody names their daughter Jezebel. She has a strong association with evil. The most evil woman who ever lived. This domineering, tyrannical, torturous, murderous, evil woman. Is who she is. And he brings her in, and it seems that Ahab, like maybe one of his biggest problems, he was just weak. If he doesn't marry her, maybe he doesn't go down this road. But he does marry her. Well, so the question is, why? Why does he want to marry, this Baal worshiping? Not just a Baal worshiper. She's like a priestess of Baal. Why does he want to marry this woman? And the answer is that Israel had a very, very wealthy, very powerful neighbor to its north, which was Phoenicia. So it's basically modern day Lebanon. Now we think, well, that's a little tiny country. That wasn't a powerful place. But no, you could not be more wrong. So the Phoenicians were the great sailors and traders of the day. They had a trading network that went all over the entire Mediterranean world and even beyond the Mediterranean world. We believe now that their vessels went as far as like England, down the western coast of Africa. They were trading beyond the Mediterranean. And in doing so, they were also learning, right? So they would go to Greece and learn from the Greeks, go to Egypt, learn from the Egyptians. They would bring in those ideas. They had an incredibly, for the time, advanced society. So they were technologically advanced. They were incredibly wealthy from this trade network. So they were really, really rich. And just so you'll kind of have an idea about who they were, one of their colonies was Carthage. So if you know your history at all, you know that the last kingdom that really almost beat Rome, almost destroyed the Romans, the last people that were rivals that maybe they can beat Rome, and instead of having Rome as the great empire of history, you could have had somebody else, was Carthage, Hannibal, the Carthaginian that takes the elephants and gets this close to knocking the Romans over, but they kind of fight back in the end and then they win. Well, Carthage was a Phoenician settlement. Okay. It was one of their colonies. So that's how powerful they were. Like one of their colonies almost knocked over the Romans, They're incredibly rich. We just read an article today, we're looking at it, where it showed that there were huge temples to Baal, way out west, in Sicily, Italy, places like that. At Gibraltar, they have found Phoenician ancient ports and, places where and temples they would worship. And particularly, this is, crazy, and this gets to their nature. So they were all of these things, they were in every earthly sense successful, but, all paganism is bad. Okay. All worship of Zeus and Apollo and Athena and false gods, it's all bad. But Phoenician Canaanite paganism was absolutely the demonic worst. It was the absolute worst form. And what we see everywhere we find Phoenician ruins, everywhere, is we find massive evidence of human sacrifice. Okay, and it seems that what they would do is they would pass out through Gibraltar as their ships would exit the Mediterranean, that they would make a human sacrifice as they would leave, and at their temples, and there's mass graves there. So this is the kind of people they were. We talked in the previous episode a little bit about Baal, Ashura, and Moloch worship. Baal and Ashura are a male and female fertility god and goddess. Ashura is Baal's mother and consort, which seems bad, but it's all sexual. Okay, it's a fertility cult, and it had a huge draw on the hearts of really everyone in that region, particularly the Israelites, because they lived in a country where everyone's farming. Every single person 90+% of the population is engaged in agriculture. So if everyone's farming or shepherding, you're all doing agriculture, then the cycle of the seasons, and particularly the rain cycle there, where it only rains certain months, it doesn't rain other months. So if those winter rains don't come, there's no rain for the whole year. And now you're starving, your fields don't grow, your trees don't produce, your lambs don't have anywhere to get water. Now they're dying. It was so tenuous and so sort of scary to them, and a religion that promised this is a God of fertility. If you'll just worship me, if you'll make these sacrifices, if you'll go to the temple and worship with the priestess or the priest, which was basically sexual immorality, if you'll go do these things, then your fields will flourish, then the rains will come. Baal is a god of the rain and of the thunder, of lightning. He's a god of fertility. He's going to bring the rain. He's going to do this stuff for you and it was seductive to them. It was seductive at a purely sensual level, because again, how do you worship Baal and Ashura? Well, you go to the temple and have sex, And the Bible talks about the male and the female shrine prostitutes and how they did all these horrible things and everything you could imagine. And it talks about Israel prostituting itself in high places, under trees in high places. It talks about, what does that mean? Well, Baal was always worshipped on high places. The altars to Baal were always on mountaintops. Okay. Ashura, typically, she was the female fertility goddess. And so a lot of times they would have shrines to her under big trees, but also on mountain places. And typically there would be sort of poles, or almost like totem poles, that would honor her. And so you have that going on. And then as the counterbalance to them, you have Moloch, which is sort of the god of death and warfare and sort of the dark side kind of stuff. And he was worshipped by sacrificing babies. And we have extra biblical documentation, which we mentioned in the previous episode, about how to worship this god. They would heat the idol. Sometimes they were made hollow. They put a fire inside of them. Sometimes they were just heated from underneath. They would heat this, the statue of the god, and they would lay their babies in the hands of it. It kind of had its hands outstretched and basically putting on your baby on a frying pan. And then they would cook the children. And so this is what is introduced into Israel by Ahab, and God was not happy. But the people, what Elijah would later say is, why are you waffling between two positions? It's like they wanted to kind of worship Yahweh because they had a historical memory of that, and it seemed kind of nice. And David and Solomon stories from way back when, and that was cool. But wow, the modern new thing is Baal, and look at these old ideas about a man should leave his mother and cling to his bride, and this sort of traditional morality, that's kind of passé, and we can go over here and do this stuff, and it's more interesting and it's more fun and it's more whatever. This is modern, if you would.
Right.
And they liked it and they pursued it. And that's the world that Elijah steps onto the scene. It's losing its religiosity, which feels like now it's putting aside the traditional morality, which again seems, pretty current. But it's also horribly abusive, which also seems fairly current. One of the things that the prophets talk about, with Samaria, which is the capital that Ahab and Jezebel built, the city of Samaria, not the region. is it talks about how abusive the people there were, how they abused the poor and, took advantage of those who had less power and, and on and on and on. So and we see that, right? We see all these sorts of things. We see the violence, the oppression, sexual immorality, and that's the situation that those who were still holding on to faith saw. And it seemed hopeless. It seemed like a never-ending descent. But God is not hopeless. God has got a plan. He's not shaken. And so his plan was to bring these guys on the stage. Okay, Elijah and Elisha are the plan. There's going to be some men that come on the stage who are not scared, who are not afraid, who will speak. And God is going to use them to sort of turn the tide. Okay, so that sounds good to me. That sounds like maybe something we want to, think about, that maybe we can learn something from. So what can we learn from these guys? That's kind of the direction we want to go with all of this.
So now are we going to kind of learn a little bit? We're going to start with Elijah.
Yeah, we'll start in 1 Kings 17.
Okay.
But before we get there, I want to set everything up. So it's a world gone crazy, descent into sort of darkness and godlessness, seems hopeless, and God brings this guy on this stage. Elijah's the first, the great prophet hero of Israel. Even till now, they, on certain holidays, they leave a place at the table for Elijah. Hopefully he'll show up, kind of thing. Like, he's just this loved guy, right? But what does the Bible say about him? I want you to hear what James 5 says about him. I think this is so important. So in James chapter 5, verse 17, it says, Elijah was a human being as we are. Okay? He was not a superhero. He was prone to fatigue and fear, depression, all the things that we feel, that we sense, pride. He had an ego. He had all the stuff that we have, all the flaws that we have. He wasn't a superhuman. He was a human who knew God and loved him and did his best to follow, but he's just a normal guy. We can't lose sight of that. These are not superheroes. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Well, and as I was reading ahead, I was cheating and reading ahead, it was, that point struck me because we're going to see his story. We're going to see how all the things he does, all of his boldness, and then we're going to see that
an epic moment of weakness.
He just kind of does something you would think that he responds to a circumstance the way you would think that just like a normal person would. He just gets scared, Right on the backside of his superhuman triumph is this collapse where you're like, it's almost like, what? It's almost like it appears he was like so trusting God and confidence of what God was going to do, and then forgot. It's like Peter walking on water, right?
Yes. Yeah. It's
and then
incredibly
being
similar.
like,
yeah. It's incredibly similar. Yeah. That's 2 episodes from now. So let's.
Well, it's but
your teaser.
I'm just saying, that's what I'm saying. I read ahead.
No, his humanity is clear throughout the whole thing. It's really cool, and that's why we can learn something from it. If he was a superhero, I can't learn anything from Spider-Man. I can't do what he can do, But if Elijah is the same as me, and to the point, what James says is he prayed earnestly that it would not rain. And for 3 years and 6 months, it did not rain on the land. Then he prayed again, and the sky gave rain, and the land produced its fruit. And the whole context of that is James talking about how the effectual, fervent prayer of a righteous man avails much. He's like, your prayers really matter. You have just the same capacity as Elijah. Elijah prayed and stopped the rain, started the rain. And if you're in God's will, functioning in his will, you have the same capacity that Elijah had. So we can learn from him, right? So, all right, what did he do? Well, first off, he accepts out of total obscurity. He's from some town called Tishbe. Nobody even knows where it is now. We think it's in Gilead, which would be in Jordan, like sort of the extreme northwest Jordan today, sort of the other side of the Jordan River, up north near the Sea of Galilee. So we think that's where he was from. Even that, we're not exactly sure. But he comes from total obscurity. He's probably just a farmer from a small town. He's a nobody. And one day he sort of ambushes the king. Okay, I believe in my envisioning of this, and we're not told from the text, okay, so don't take this as biblical, just as my imagining how maybe the Bible worked, because it says that he confronted the king. And I can't imagine this farmer from nowhere got into the palace. And so I always envision that the king is out traveling, with his entourage going down some wilderness road somewhere one day, and Elijah sort of jumped out of the woods or something, But it says that, he comes on the scene and says, it's not going to rain anymore till I say so. This paganism is too much. God is going to stop it. And so now until I say so, there's no more rain. And that's it. And you got to think they'd be like, well, who was that idiot? Maybe they would have thought, let's kill him, but like, come on, it's not going to stop the rain. So they probably just thought, crazy man, let's move on. And then Elijah disappears. And this is what the Bible says. It says, and the Lord came to him and said, leave here, turn eastward, and hide at the Wadi Kerith, where it enters the Jordan. You are to drink from the wadi. I have commanded the ravens to provide for you there. So this is kind of what happens. God brings Elijah on the stage. He confronts the king, but then he knows that as this drought actually takes place, they're going to want to kill him. And so God says, okay, now go hide. And he sends him to this place called the Kerith stream. Okay. Or the wadi. Wadi is it's basically a Hebrew / Arab, word, Aramaic word that means sort of a riverbed, and what you have to know is in that part of the world that the riverbeds don't always flow. Mm-hmm. They flow when there's rain. They don't flow when there's not rain. So it could be a dry wadi or a stream, depending on, if there's a spring or not. It basically just means a valley. Yeah. And typically, because the land's really, really rugged and steep there, they're typically almost like canyons, really mm-hmm. steep with a bed at the bottom that again flows if there's water, and if not so. So he goes to this place called the Kerith stream, other side of the Jordan River, probably the wilderness, nobody's around there. And he hides out for 2 or 3 years. For 2 or 3 years, he's at this place. The ravens bring him food. He drinks from the stream. And that's just kind of what is happening. Now, what I want to think about is the fact that we said he's a regular man. If he's a regular man who feels like regular men feel, what did it feel like to hide out for 2 or 3 years in a cave by a stream, getting fed by ravens and drinking from the stream?
Can I answer that?
Sure.
So he's a regular man, right?
Yeah.
Sounds like a man cave. Sounds pretty awesome. Just kidding.
It sounds pretty okay. See. So this is where you get the extrovert and the introvert.
Introvert. It sounds great. It's like, so you're just dropping food, and you're just chilling in your man cave, and you got some water. Yeah. You're like, I need people.
Yeah, I'm like, that sounds so lonely. I would be like a week into that, like, God, please, please
send someone to talk to.
Yeah,
you'd have Wilson.
Yeah, I'd have. Yeah, there you go. So to me, it sounds like it would just be lonely. Like it would be really faith affirming because, every day birds bring you bread, meat, and food to eat. That's crazy stuff. That's fairy tale stuff, Yeah. The birds delivering the food to you, that would build your faith in God that he's protecting you, taking care of you, miraculously providing. So that's great. But it also had to be hard and lonely. And you got to think, well, during those 2 or 3 years he's hiding out, what's happening in the region? What's happening in Israel? What's happening in Phoenicia? What's happening in those surrounding countries? Well, there's a famine. There's no rain. And so that means, when there's that, what happens in Israel till now is you get these heavy rains in December, January, February, and virtually no rain outside of that window. Okay, 90% of the rainfall is in that window. And then that's for the whole rest of the year. And the summers bake. I never want to take people on trips or tours to Israel in July, August, even September, like late September. Yeah, we'll start thinking about it. It's just so hot. Like I've had groups, there it's like 114, 116 degrees, and you open you go to these crazy, amazing sites, but you can't enjoy anything when it's 114 degrees,
Right.
and you open the tour bus and it's just like, yeah. And people go see things like, yep, we saw it. Okay, we're back, let's just go get in the air conditioning. And it's just it's a misery. And so the country bakes, for the summer months. And if there's no rain at all, and that's why when you see pictures of the country, it's very kind of strange if you don't understand the country, because you can see the same hill. And if you see a picture taken in like February or March, it looks like Scotland. In the same hill, you see a picture taken in like August, September, or October before the rains come, and it's just baked. Everything's just beige and burnt, and that's the normal cycle there. Well, if that baked, burnt, no rain cycle goes for 3 years, everything dies. Even trees with deep roots start to die. Like this is not good. And what's happening to the humans? They're dying too. Starting with poor people. Richer people have a little more resources, a little more capacity to purchase maybe from farther away, but not really. And when Israelites and Canaanites, when people from that part of the world, when they envisioned the worst things that could possibly happen, they didn't envision invasions. Invasions were bad. People died during invasions, but they envisioned drought and famine. I mean, because at least in an invasion, you die quick. You get stabbed and it's over. Mm-hmm. And hopefully your children are spared. In a drought or a famine, you die slowly. And your kids die first, because they're smaller and weaker. They don't have that kind of reserves. And so what you've got to imagine is this is going on for these years. And I do not believe that Elijah was the kind of guy to glory in that. I think he thought it was necessary to return Israel to true worship of God. In the long run, it was worth it. But I don't think he enjoyed it, knowing that thousands and thousands of people probably died in those years because he prayed and God answered his prayer and stopped the rain. You've got to think, like, for all these people who've gone over to Baal worship, right? They, I try to put myself in the headspace of a Baal worshiping mom watching her baby die. Her 3, 4, 5-year-old. You couldn't feed them for days on end, and they're weak and they can't hardly move anymore. And you're watching that. What are you saying to that kid? Because see, it's interesting that this event with Elijah happened in closed space. It was hidden. Okay, it was just the court, whoever witnesses were there. He pops out of the bushes and says, "This is what's going to happen." And he leaves, but then Ahab, as it begins to go on, he believes this is the man who has troubled or he calls Elijah later the troubler of Israel. Mm-hmm. And what he believes in his pagan mind is that Elijah has sort of like cast a curse on the country. And if we can kill Elijah, then the curse will be broken. Mm-hmm. And so he sends out riders and searchers to all the neighboring kingdoms and everywhere around to try to find. So the word has gone out. This guy named Elijah has cursed us. If you'll find Elijah and we can kill him, we can stop this. And so he's become the villain of every story. Again, if you're a Baal worshiping mama talking to your child as they starve, you're going to say, well, this evil man Elijah cursed us. And if we can just find him, it's, like that's a heavy load to carry emotionally. So I think Elijah is super stressed. Or to me, he had to be. There's a really heavy thing going on spiritually. I think, as best I can think through it. So, all right. So that goes on for a while. Eventually, the famine that has affected the whole area affects him, and the stream dries up. Because whatever the source at the head of all that, well, it hasn't been any rain for 2 or 3 years. It dries up. There's more water flowing. And he's got to go. And so God gives him a command. And he says, get up, go to Zarephath that belongs to Sidon and stay there. Look, I have commanded a woman who is a widow to provide for you there. Okay, that's crazy. it's crazy stuff because he doesn't tell him to go to Israel. He tells him to go to Sidon. Well, who's from Sidon? Jezebel's from Sidon. Jezebel is the princess of Sidon. She was the daughter of the king of Sidon. Okay? So I want you to go to Jezebel's hometown and go hang out there. This is, if you would, this is the world capital of Baal worship. Okay, the center of the darkness. I want you to go right to the center of this, and I want to take care of you there. And he says, okay. It's pretty weird, but I'll do it. The famine's there as well. So he goes there, he finds the widow. And that's weird also, because, read your Bible over and over and over through the Bible. Widows are associated with abject poverty because at that time you had to have a male provider, protector. Like, you just had to. And a widow was the most vulnerable, impoverished person you could imagine. So the idea that a widow is going to, pay your food bills for the next several months is weird at best. Okay. But also a Baal worshiping Sidonian widow, even weirder, in the absolute heart of the darkness that is Baal worship. So he goes there. And you have this crazy scene, and I'll kind of just summarize. You have this crazy scene where he goes, he finds the widow, and he says, "Hey, what are you doing?" And she says, "Well, I'm gonna, bake my last loaf of bread and die. Me and my son are gonna eat, and then we're gonna die." And he says, "Great, feed me first." And you're like, "What are you doing? Are you serious?" Go, because he says, the quote in the Bible is like, "Go and do as you have said, but first make a small loaf from it and bring it to me." So your very last meal, your last little bit of flour, last little bit of oil, last little bit of water, you're gonna make a little cake, bake it. Yeah, I want some of that. The first part. And if somebody said that to me, I just smack them and, like, whatever. I want to feed my boy. Get out of here.
Yeah.
But this woman, the Bible says that God had spoken to her. Somehow she knew that she should do this. And so she does. She feeds him. And what the Bible says is that throughout, it says the flour jar did not become empty and the oil jug did not run dry. So for the next several months, he's staying there with these people, and there's this continual daily miracle of, and in my envisioning of it, I don't think the oil jar went like floop and got full, but somehow that little bit at the bottom just was always there. There was always enough for the next day, the next day, the next day, the next day, and on and on. And there's this miracle of God's provision that takes place. And if what I think God is doing, well, let's do the next story and then we'll talk about what God's doing. But then something really bad happens. And the woman's son gets really sick and dies. And the woman thinks that she understands now because she's a Baal worshiper and she doesn't know God. But she knows herself and she knows she's a sinful human. And so she looks at Elijah and says, "Man of God, what do you have against me? Have you come to call my attention to my iniquity so that my son is put to death?" In other words, did you come here to condemn me for my sin and kill my boy? Is that what you really came here for? I thought you were taking care of us, but really you came to punish me for my sin, to tease me with a little bit of hope and then let my son die? Because that's what she thinks about God. That, and her gods are vengeful. And I don't know what this woman had in her past, but she was honest enough to know that I'm sinful, I'm bad. And so maybe that's what God did. He sent you here not to take care of me, but to punish me, to torment me. Is that what you're here for? And that's the last thing Elijah was there for. And so Elijah takes the son, takes him to an upstairs room, takes his dead body, lays him on a bed. And as best we know, there is no recorded incident prior to this of anyone dead ever becoming not dead. There's no resuscitation up to this point in the Bible. So Elijah is praying for something that has never happened. He says, God, please, have you brought tragedy on the widow I'm staying with by killing her son? He's like, God, don't let this be the witness. Don't let this be, what happened. He cries out 3 times, please let the boy's life come into him. He's just pleading for this family because he cares about them at this point. And it says the boy's life came back into him. And the woman at the end of that says, now I know you're a man of God and the Lord's word from your mouth is true. So this woman, it seems, becomes a believer at that point. But what I think has happened here is that God is preparing Elijah for this final showdown on Mount Carmel that is to come. Mm-hmm. And he's building his faith. He's like, look, I can take care of you at this stream. Now we're going to go to the capital of the evil, of this horrible, horrible Baal worship. Go to Jezebel's hometown. Stay there. I'll protect you even there. And he did. And then it's like he's tearing away at Baal. You think Baal's in charge of life and death? You think Baal's in charge of fertility and provision? Like, mm-hmm. No, I'm going to do in his hometown a miracle of provision and then a miracle of life. I'm the one in charge of these things. And I think that what's happened is, and I think this happens to us sometimes, is that there's something big that God has called us to do out in our future. Because the next episode is going to be ultra public. Thousands of witnesses, big, showdown on Mount Carmel. That God has a big public calling thing he wants us to do out there. It's in front of us, but we can't do that till we're prepared. And so I think what God did was he took this 2 or 3 years, it's 3 years, and he built Elijah up. Like he prepared him over that time, built his faith, because it's going to take a tremendous amount of faith for Elijah to climb that mountain and step into the ring with the 400 prophets of Baal that just want to kill him, And so I think that's what's going on. It's like, and sometimes we get frustrated because, we want to do the really big, significant, important things. We want to be meaningful and important and a leader and a boss and whatever, like right now. And God's like, if you did that right now, you'd screw it up. So we're going to take a few years. We're going to kind of take you off stage and work on you so that when we put you on stage, you're ready for that moment. And I think that's what's happening in Elijah's life. It's this preparatory time where God's like, see, I can do this and I can do this and I can do this. Okay. Can you trust me? And I think that's being built in him over the course of all this. And he's also just really attacking Baal as well. Look, his hometown, I can do these miracles. He can't do anything. Yeah. So I think that's kind of what's going on in this first sort of chapter of Elijah's story.
Yeah. I mean, I think, being fed by ravens and surviving for a few years out in the middle of nowhere
while the whole kingdom's trying to kill you.
Yeah, that would build my faith. I mean, I think that's definitely a lot of parallels to for us normal people like him.
Well, most of us will probably never pray a famine on a country that starves thousands of people. It probably is not exactly what's going to happen to us.
Yeah.
But there are going to be moments in our lives where we have to stand up against something that's wrong. Mm-hmm. And the people that are perpetrating that wrong aren't going to like us for it.
Right.
I think that's just true. And so if we're going to stand up, if we're going to make a difference, then, I do think that there has to be that time where God prepares us for that moment, because that's hard. It's hard to, we sometimes I think we minimize people's suffering, or like, people are going through things. Maybe our kids at school, they're trying to be believers and other kids are making fun of them, or, whatever. You just, they think it's small things, but you're like, well, at least you're not getting sawed in half like people in the Bible, look what they went through. Peter got crucified upside down. You're just getting ostracized and made fun of. Like, that's not that big a deal. No, it is a big deal. Like, it is a big deal. And you don't come out of the womb prepared for that, to stand up to, public scrutiny and attack, So I think God in our lives, he builds our faith. He works in our lives. He does, I know I can look at my life and there are clearly times when God performed what I can only describe as miracles of provision, where there just simply was not enough. Mm-hmm. You're 2 weeks into the month and the money's all gone and there's still food to buy and gas to buy and whatever. And things just happened, Mm-hmm. Like I clearly think God has done that in my life almost more times than I can count.
Yep.
I remember one time, we were absolutely dirt poor, broke. And Abby, my oldest daughter, was about 1.5. And I was playing with her, stupid young dad, and I dislocated her elbow. Like I'd picked her up too. You never pick up your child by the hands, they tell you that, but they ain't lying.
It's a dad move.
So I picked her up and dislocated her elbow.
Yeah.
And it was like 2:00 in the morning. We're living in Jerusalem. We don't have a car. So, because there's public transit there, we're not at 2:00 in the morning. So like I got this baby with a dislocated elbow and no way to get to a doctor and no money to pay one either. And we were like, I don't know what to do, and I just remember that night, my mom's a nurse, so I'd heard of, I'm not a doctor, but I can play one on TV or something. I don't know. So we're like, I heard before if you kind of like put their arm like this, it kind of go like this and maybe it'll go back in. And I kind of tried and she was just like, she was like, okay, that's not working. I don't want to break anything. And at some point we were like, well, let's just pray. And we prayed, and I mean, almost to the minute, her elbow, like we prayed and it just popped back in. She went from screams like, okay, I'm cool now. Oh, back to just like, I'm fine, just in a moment, and if you don't believe in God, you're like, well, it's going to pop back in eventually. Like,
right.
Okay, maybe, but I know my baby girl was hurting and I prayed and her elbow went back in socket.
Right.
And I can think of things like that over and over and over again. So I do believe that God works in your life and he takes care of you and he builds you, so that you can tolerate and stand the next thing.
Right.
Well, it's really true.
Yeah. And even in unanswered prayers or difficult situations that, I've mentioned maybe in other episodes, like how broke we were. Because when we got married and moved to Atlanta, it was like 2001, and then 9/11 happened like a month after we moved here, and I was like an intern at a production company, so I made like not enough money to support us, and then my wife was in real estate, so then the real estate market went nowhere. It just evaporated, and so made no money for years, and sold a car for groceries one summer, and just like I had to survive, put as much as I made on my credit card every year just to like make ends meet, because I only made like $6,000 a year for like the first year. Then I made like $15,000. This wasn't that long ago. Yeah. This was not
enough to feed the wife and kids.
This wasn't 1970, but those are like awful times, but those times gave me a strong enough faith to really face whatever, and so you can't really, you got to take the bad and realize that it does build your faith in the future. So
while we're telling old man like how much I suffered when I was younger stories,
uphill in the snow both ways.
The worst,
I got another one after this.
The worst I remember it for us, living in Jerusalem, like poor food there is this Palestinian dish called mjadra, and it's basically just like lentils and rice. And because you can buy a bag of lentils for nothing, like 50 cents, and you can buy a bag of rice for about the same.
That's what we ate, rice and beans.
And I remember us making, one week, we were just married, me and Kelly, no kids yet. I remember us making a pot of mjadra, the rice and beans. we ate on that for about a week. I mean, it was just like that was all we had. You know,
our number one meal
rough.
was beans, black beans, rice, and then just a can of like chopped tomatoes. Not even like just a can of chopped tomatoes, and we would make that and we would eat it for a couple of days, and I would take it to lunch, at work.
Yeah.
But it was like, it was fine. It worked out. What I would say, one of the funniest,
wasn't fine during that time because like I'm kind of I'm a little bit of maybe a foodie. Like I clearly enjoy food way more than I should.
And my wife, y'all have
about day 3 into that, I'm like, this is torture. Like,
where's
I
all
need something else. So I don't know. I'm gonna say it's fine. I mean, you get through it,
Yeah. Well, one last funny story is when we sold a car for groceries. So after we sold a car for groceries, I only had one car, but I worked like 45 minutes away from where we lived on the other side of Atlanta. So my grandma gave me her car, which is a 90-something Oldsmobile, like blue Cutlass. Like imagine that. It's got the gear stick right here, the bench seats. So the thing with that one is as soon as we got it, the AC went out. And it would start overheating. So it actually didn't have AC within the first month or two, and then it would start overheating because she had never driven it 45 miles.
So you're driving in the summer Atlanta with your heater on to keep the engine cool.
Exactly. So I'm driving Atlanta traffic, standstill traffic. I remember one day it was raining, so I couldn't roll the windows all the way down, and it's summer, and I had the heater on, and I had to just crack the windows. It's like fogging out, and I was just sitting there in traffic like, what is going on? But I never considered moving and leaving or going back home or whatever. We just kind of always felt like we were supposed to stay here. It was never even something we entertained. So it all was just built resilience and character, right?
Yeah.
In the end. So and now it's just a story. So
yeah.
But anyways,
it's true.
I could do this for days.
And it's like, well, and that's God. Elijah's time in Zarephath, he's eating that same loaf of bread
right
every day for a long time, but it was lean time, but God prepared him through it and provided for him through it. I mean, I'm sure he would have liked a little broader diet, but nevertheless, it's the care and provision of God.
Yeah.
And I think you learn those things, and in the end, looking back on it, you're thankful for it. At least I think I know I am, because there are these stories of faith where I know God took care of us, and I also know I'm tougher and more resilient for having gone through it.
Right.
Don't want to do it again, if I could avoid it, but if I had to, I could, because I have, So yeah, it's good.
Cool. Awesome. Well, that was a good episode. Went a little long, but it's nice to, to chat.
We can edit out the old man stories if we need to.
Well, maybe we'll leave them. So, next time, I guess we're going to get into what happens next. Dun, dun, dun.
Showdown on Mount Carmel.
There we go. So can't wait to talk about that. And I'm sure you're going to give us some insights as to where that is and the land and whatnot. And
why not?
Yeah, might as well. So anyways, as always, check us out on thelandinthebible.com, and thanks for tuning in now, and we will see you later.
Hey guys, if you like our content, please click like and subscribe. That really helps us out a lot. And then also go to thelandinthebible.com and subscribe for premium content. If you go over there, we've got tons of stuff that's really great. We have print materials that you can download. We have PDF study guides for all of our lessons. We've got devotional materials over there. We also have every single video and podcast we've done in full-length format with no ad interruptions and full video. So you can get all of that on thelandinthebible.com with the premium subscription, and that really helps us. It helps us generate more content, and also half of it goes to help us go overseas and help refugee kids, is what we're really called to do.